Thank goodness it's Friday. Welcome back into another episode here on the BDGE Dynasty channel. My name is Adam. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content that we bring to you Monday through Friday, every single week here on the game of Dynasty. And right now, because the 2024 draft is upon us, it comes up in about a month. Everybody's getting really excited and focused on this 2024 class, and in particular, resetting their age on their Dynasty teams and getting younger. And while that's important, everybody does want to focus on age. At the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to win titles. And there's 5 people in particular that are being really slept on in Dynasty startups. And yeah, some of them are a little older. Some are even on the wrong side of 30. But that doesn't mean they can't be key cogs and help you win titles on your contending teams in Dynasty. So right now, it's time to start respecting your elders. In order to do that, I need you to start respecting tradition. Tuck your shirts in. Stop yapping, because I'm about to cook. All right, so the first person being super disrespected in Dynasty startups, I need somebody to help me make sense of this one. I really don't understand it. He's coming off the board at the 903 in Dynasty startups. Let me just give you some perspective here. Last year, as far as targets go, number 12 in the NFL, just behind a guy like Jamar Chase. Okay, so he was ahead of guys like DJ Moore, Chris Olave, and Mike Evans. And here's the thing, this guy doesn't even play wide receiver. He plays tight end. Now let me give you some historical perspective when it comes to the tight end position and 143 targets. I mean, you're probably thinking about guys like CeeDee Lamb last year who had over 180 targets. So when we remove the wide receiver position and we just focus on tight ends, how many tight ends have had over 140 targets in a single season in the NFL? There's been 17 times that someone's had 140 targets or more, but when you take out the people that have done it on multiple occasions, that ends up only bringing you a list of 10 people. So only 10 tight ends have had a season of over 140 targets. Let's start at the top. First one, Zach Ertz, 156 targets in 2018. Then you got Mark Andrews recently in 2021, had 153 targets. So Tony Gonzalez, one of the best tight ends that the game has ever seen, has made this list 4 times. His highest target season was 154. You also have Travis Kelce at 152 in his highest target season recently in 2022. He's made this list 3 times. Jimmy Graham made the list twice, 149 targets and 143 targets in his 2 seasons over 140. Jason Witten, another historically great tight end, 149 targets in his best season. And then an extremely talented tight end, Kellen Winslow Jr. for the Browns had 148 targets back in 2007. Darren Waller recently in the COVID season had 145 targets in 2020. Antonio Gates in 2005 had 1 season, 140 targets exactly. And then finally this year we get Evan Engram with 143 targets. Now here's the thing, not just 140 targets. Let's not just stop there. He had 114 catches last year. There's only been 1 time someone's had over 114 catches in a single season, and that was Zach Ertz. Like I said, he had the most targets ever in a single season with 156 that year. So he has 116. Now in the large majority of formats, Sam Laporta finished at the tight end 1, but depending on what your scoring format was, for example, if it's tiered PPR, half point for the running back, full point for the receiver, and 1.5 for the tight end, Evan Engram finished ahead of Sam Laporta in that format. But regardless, even if he wasn't ahead of Sam Laporta, he was right there, extremely close with him at tight end 2, one of the best tight ends in the NFL all last season, to be drafted at the 903 in Dynasty startups now. Someone explain it to me. I mean, I really hope that it's age that's pushing him this far, turning 30 in early September, right as the season comes this year. However, if it's just age, go up almost 2 rounds. George Kittle at the 708, and he's going to be turning 31 this season. Then you really want to talk about age. Travis Kelce, and I get it, yes, he's probably going to go down as the best tight end ever in NFL history. Now he's going to be turning 35, and he's going ahead of George Kittle at the 611 in Dynasty startups, and Evan Engram, who's younger, just outscored both of those guys. So it can't just simply be age. Now, if you're not totally scared off by a 29-year-old tight end who's going to be turning 30 at the start of the season, let's take a look at Evan Engram, the Jacksonville offense, his season last year, and what we can predict or project going into 2024. And I'm telling you, there's a lot to like, especially when you think about that price tag in the 9th round. And when we look at Jacksonville as a whole, that 2021 season, T-Law's rookie season, Urban Meyer was the head coach, a massive disaster for that offense, that entire organization. He was a one and done. So in 2022, they bring in Doug Peterson, who had had a year off after being with Philadelphia for quite some time. And since he's been there, people may not realize this, but Trevor Lawrence is 4th in the NFL over the last 2 seasons as far as pass attempts go. And as a team, the last 2 years under Doug Peterson, Jacksonville's 8 in the NFL for team pass attempts. So a team that's really pass happy. And when we look at last season, right? Evan Engram, as I told you, he was 143 targets on the year. That did rank number 1 for the Jags as far as targets go. But just behind him at 136 targets, number 17 in the NFL was Calvin Ridley. He had just come over from Atlanta with the gambling issues, and you saw the huge extension that Tennessee just signed Calvin Ridley to. Now, after Ridley with that 136 targets, you have Christian Kirk, who had 85 last year. He did get hurt in the first play of Week 13, and he was going to be on pace for well over 100 targets as well. He was trailing Ridley, though, on a target pace per game. And then after that, you really have scraps. I mean, ETN had 73 targets for the season. And after paying Gabriel Davis 3 years for $39 million, an average of 13 a year, there's a good chance that this team is done addressing the receiver position and doesn't really bring in a huge alpha as far as targets go. Gabriel Davis in his 4 years in Buffalo averaged roughly 75 targets a game. So it's highly unlikely he's going to step in and just fill this void that Calvin Ridley leaves as far as the vacated targets go. We don't know what they're going to do in the draft and how they're going to try to fill this wide receiver room, if they are going to at all. What we do know is one of the top 20 wide receivers as far as target earners go is gone. There's nobody else really on this team currently that's guaranteed to step into a Calvin Ridley type role. Even if they draft one in round 1 or round 2, that guy probably will take a little bit of time to get going. And still, even if he earns a high percentage of targets, what we know is Evan Engram right now, his opportunity share with this offense has no reason to go down. If anything, you could argue that going into next year, even though it was a ridiculous season for him, he could possibly be in line for a larger workload. Now just stick with me here in theory. Let's say that Calvin Ridley moves on and Christian Kirk next year is going to step back into this wide receiver 1 role for the Jaguars. They basically have the same core group of players that they did in the 2022 season. Now, if you say that he's going to get a similar number that Calvin Ridley did in targets, 2022, he earned 133, almost the exact same. And if we take a look at Week 13 on for Evan Engram, when Christian Kirk went down and it was just him and Calvin Ridley, those 2 primary passing targets in this offense, I don't think people really understand how great he was down the stretch. Evan Engram tore the NFL up during this sample size from Week 13 to Week 18. In Week 13, he had 27.7 points in a 1.5 tight end premium league. Then the following week, with Christian Kirk officially out of the lineup, they prepped all week for this, he exploded 38 points. That was the second best week for the tight end position all year last year. Only Travis Kelce in Week 7 versus the Chargers had more points in a single game for a tight end last year. He had 41.9. Now, after that huge week, Evan Engram had his one clunker during this stretch. He was tight end 26 in Week 15. But then in Week 16, he followed that up with a tight end 3 week, 22.5 points. Week 17, tight end 9 on the week, 15 points in that one. And then, with their season on the line in Week 18, trying to get into the playoffs, Evan Engram balled out again, 28.9 points. Now, a little different circumstances, but it kind of eerily reminds me of a situation in 2022 when TJ Hockenson got traded from Detroit going over to Minnesota, albeit a 9-game sample size as opposed to a 6-game sample size. TJ Hockenson from weeks 9 to 17, people were basically saying, if TJ Hockenson can replicate what he did in that sample size and translate it to the whole season in 2023, we'd be looking at the sky being the limit for him. And lo and behold, that ended up being the case. During that 9-game sample size, TJ Hockenson from weeks 9 to 17, he had a total of 17.5 points per game, and then he also had 9.5 targets per game. Now, comparatively, looking at Evan Engram last year, in his entire season, not just a small sample size, he nearly mirrors what that 9-game sample size was for TJ Hockenson. 8.5 targets a game as opposed to 9.5, and 17 points per game as opposed to 17.5. Now, but in the 6-game sample size, when it was just 2 primary target earners in this offense, in Evan Engram and Calvin Ridley, he was averaging over 10 targets a game and 23.5 fantasy points per game in a 1.5 tight end premium league. Now, in final summary here with Evan Engram, let's take a look at ranges of outcomes. Let's go down the naysayer path. Let's say pick 17, they draft a wide receiver. I just saw a recent mock had Adonai Mitchell going pick 17 to Jacksonville. So let's say Adonai Mitchell comes in to be the outside receiver, Christian Kirk's in the slot, and then Evan Engram at tight end. Let's say Christian Kirk steps back up to that 8 targets per game like he had in 22, and let's say that Adonai Mitchell even comes in to be a pretty darn good target earner. Last year, the only receiver that had over 7 targets a game, Puka Nacua, who had the best rookie season we've ever seen at the receiver position. And even if you take a look at a guy as good as Jamar Chase, he had 7.5 targets a game in his rookie season. So let's say that their wide receiver 1 that they drafted pick 17, here theoretically it's Adonai Mitchell, comes in and starts earning targets at a very high clip day 1, and he gets that Christian Kirk share of 7.1 targets per game, which is really lofty considering guys like Zay Flowers, Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, none of them got 7 targets a game, even in this scenario. And then we'll go ahead and use weeks 1 through 12 for Evan Engram as the target sample size. Let's say that basically Ridley leaves and those targets don't get vacated at all. And even if we use that sample size of weeks 1 through 12 on the lower end, that's 128 targets, basically 7.5 targets a game, and still puts him in that elite range of being one of the few tight ends to get 100 catches. The point that I'm making here with Engram, it's really not crazy to say that he could have a better season in 2024, given the situation Jacksonville has. While people on the surface are fading a tight end that's turning 30 and is seemingly getting old, what are we looking at? This is not a tight end that's trending down, or we can say, oh, this logically makes sense that he's going to be getting worse. This is a guy that's getting better and is ultimately heading into the prime years of his career. Do not fade Evan Engram. Do not let him slip this low. Go get Evan Engram shares before it's too late and he becomes another league winner in 2024. Now, also coming off the board in the 9th round and someone being wildly disrespected in startups, from my Cleveland Browns, wide receiver 41 off the board is Amari Cooper. And while he'll be 30 years old this year, last year, he was wide receiver 18 in points per game at 15.1. And basically, Amari Cooper last year gave you the same production as guys like Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk, and Devontae Adams. All right, with Amari Cooper, I get it. I mean, heading into this season, he'll be 30 years old, and you're looking at the age cliff, right? And I don't like to draft old receivers when I don't have to. This isn't like Cooper Kupp last year, turning 30, you draft him in round 3. Or last year when you drafted Devontae Adams, who was turning 31 in the 4th round of Dynasty startups. You're into the 9th round now of Dynasty startups. There's over 40 receivers off the board. What do you expect? Now, when I start drafting receivers in round 9 or later especially that carries the age tag of Amari Cooper, I'm going to be looking for 2 things in particular. Do they still carry week winning ability? And then secondly, do they also carry a floor? And so when we take a look at Amari Cooper, does he check these boxes? Now, if we really want to go to the extreme with wide receivers, let's take a look at the best finishes to set the bar at a crazy high number. There was 9 times a receiver scored 40 points in a single game. CeeDee Lamb did it twice. So there was 8 receivers that gave a 40-plus monster point game. If one of your receivers is going for 40 in a single game, you're going to have an absolute goon squad on the other side, or the rest of that team is going to have to flop to really lose that game. In the group of receivers to do this, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, CeeDee Lamb did it twice, Keenan Allen, and Amari Cooper. Now, when we take a look at these, there was only 2 times that a receiver in PPR had over 50 points in a single game, and Amari Cooper was one of those. The only time a receiver scored more than Amari Cooper did in a single week was Jamar Chase in week 5 when he scored 52.5. When you take a look at his floor, he had an unbelievably unlucky situation and awful quarterback play when we take a look at the 23 season in totality. Of the 32 teams last year, there was obviously a lot of quarterback injuries in general, but only 9 of those 32 teams had at least 3 quarterbacks that started a game for them. Now, of those 9 teams, 6 of them had 3 different starters: the Cardinals, the Giants, the Vikings, the Raiders, the Rams, and the Squealers. There were 2 teams that had 4 different starters throughout the year: the Jets and the Vikings. Now, the Browns, the only team in the NFL with 5 different starters. Now, when you really start to dive into Amari Cooper's stats relative to the quarterbacks that were starting or playing for him, you start to see a tale of why some of these weeks were really, really horrendous for him. So weeks 4, 11, and 12, those were the 3 weeks where DTR was the starter. Those 3 weeks in particular were awful for Amari Cooper. Wide receiver 98, 48, and 87. Now, in week 7, Watson was the starter, but got hurt extremely early in that game versus the Colts. 86% of the snaps that week went to PJ Walker, wide receiver 63 on the week. In week 13, he got a concussion in that game. So week 1, he was wide receiver 57. That game, Watson started and finished the whole game. So when you take a look at Amari Cooper, the whole season from weeks 1 to 17, there was 1 week where he had either Deshaun Watson or Joe Flacco as the starter, and he finished outside the top 29 receivers. That was in week 1. I'm not trying to say that he's never going to have a bad game, but the point is when you take a look at the whole season, the large majority of his really, really poor performances can be chalked up to really bad quarterback play, and we shouldn't really have any concern about Amari Cooper losing a step, getting older, or not being able to perform at a high level. Quarterback play in general for the Browns was not very good this year, and we don't know how good Watson's going to be next year and if he's going to stay healthy. But I can say when he's on the field, he is much better than what we saw in quarterback performance from Dorian Thompson-Robinson, PJ Walker, and Jeff Driscoll. All right, and that brings us to the 3rd player who's being wildly disrespected right now in startups, and that's going to be James Conner from Arizona. At this point of the year, in March, typically I'm not looking to invest much in the running back position at all, unless I'm top guys like Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Breece Hall, who seemingly have a ton of dynasty value. Getting down this far at the end of the 11th round, James Conner right now, what more could you want? I'm shooting my shot again on a 1-year production for James Conner in a situation where he's been thriving and everyone continues to bet that it's not going to be this year. And how many years are we going to do this? Everybody keeps saying James Conner's washed. James Conner's washed. But year in and year out, the last few years, while everyone's saying he's dead and he can't continue to produce, all he does is produce. Going back to the 2021 season, he was running back 9 in points per game, over 17 points per game in that season. In the 2022 season, he was running back 10 on a points per game basis, over 15 points per game in that year. And remember, that was the year that Kyler Murray, after 11 games, tears his ACL, and the offense really kind of went to shit. So now coming into this year, of course, this is finally the year that James Conner is going to be washed. He's turning 28 going into this last year, 2023, and Kyler Murray's not going to be healthy to start the year, and there's rumors he's literally not going to play at all for the whole season. So of course, this is it. James Conner's done. But what happens? James Conner, yet again, running back 13 in points per game. Very similar though to last year, he had 15.5 points on a per game basis. But if you dig a little deeper, you take a look at when Kyler Murray returned in week 10 and what James Conner did from that point on. Totally different situation than his whole body of work for the year. Of those 8 weeks where he was the main running back and Kyler Murray was the quarterback, 4 of them, so half of those 8 weeks, he finished as a top 5 running back on the year. In 5 of the 8 weeks, he was a top 12 option at the running back position. So when we're talking about the 11th round, the 11-10 in Dynasty startups right now, coming off the board at running back 33, we aren't even drafting him right now as one of the top 32 running backs in the NFL. Now, there's always the situation where Arizona goes into the draft and they address the running back position. But unless they draft one of those guys really high, like a day 2 running back, you can't tell me that anyone else they bring in guarantees that James Conner doesn't go into this season as the 1A option at the running back position for Arizona, with Kyler Murray there and their position with a very high draft pick where they could be drafting a very potent receiver to really help this offense take a step forward. You add that to Trey McBride and a full season of Kyler Murray being healthy, this could actually be a top half of the league offense where James Conner could give you one final season to really make a push on a Dynasty contender. And that brings us to the 4th massive value right now, I believe, in Dynasty startups, coming off the board in the 13th round, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, y'all really nuke? I know going into this year he's going to be turning 32, and the Titans just paid Calvin Ridley a massive 4-year contract to bring over some target competition for DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, seriously, he's coming off the board at wide receiver 58. There's 57 receivers that you would rather take in Dynasty startups right now. Absolutely crazy. Doesn't make any sense to me. And I get the age concern. Last year he was boom or bust. But if you take a look, when Will Levis took over as the starter in week 8, and over those final 10 weeks of the season, week 8 to week 18, the target leaders from that point, DeAndre Hopkins, 9th in the NFL with 90 targets in that 10-week sample size. Now, only 6 of those people were wide receivers, but 6 receivers from weeks 8 to 18 had more targets than DeAndre Hopkins did. Of those 10 weeks, 6 of them, DeAndre Hopkins had 14 fantasy points or more. And finally, across those 10 weeks, DeAndre Hopkins was wide receiver 17 in points per game during that stretch. All right, so you're not going to stop. You want me to talk about Calvin Ridley. Okay, let's get into the Calvin Ridley thing. Calvin Ridley's incoming. That's going to be somebody that really actually brings a lot of target competition for DeAndre Hopkins, you're going to think. But here's the thing. When has DeAndre Hopkins ever in his career operated with somebody else that gets a ton of targets on the other side? You got to go back to the OG days for the Texans. DeAndre Hopkins in his second year was playing alongside Andre Johnson, Hall of Famer, one of the best wide receivers out there. They both had over 100 targets in that season. Obviously, he's played with Will Fuller for all those years, but Will Fuller could never stay healthy. He was a nice, long, deep compliment for him. But DeAndre Hopkins, after that, going to Arizona, he played that 1 year with Marquise Hollywood Brown. But those 2 years, he didn't play full seasons there in Arizona. He got hurt. This last year in Tennessee, playing a full season. So he showed that he could play 17 games in Tennessee with 137 targets. Not quite commanding that 160 type target load that he was getting in his prime. But that's still a pretty heavy dose of targets. And if you look, who else was commanding targets for the Titans last year? I mean, literally nobody. Chig got 77 targets. Tajay Spears at running back got 70 targets. Keep all this in mind because let's talk about how different the coaching staff and philosophy is going to be for this Tennessee team moving forward. The Titans are moving on from longtime coach Mike Vrabel. He was the head coach from 2018 to 2023. This team was nearly dead last as far as pass attempts. Last season, 494 pass attempts. The year prior, 456 pass attempts. Now incoming is Brian Callahan, who's been the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati for quite some time. If you take a look at him in his 5 years as the OC along Zach Taylor, when he was the OC from 2019 to 2023, in pass attempts, 616, 581, 555, 610, and 615 the last 2 seasons. They were top 10 in 3 of those seasons, and they were at least middle of the pack in all 5 of those years. You can totally expect Brian Callahan to come over and increase the total number of times they're passing the ball. And if you think about 494 pass attempts versus something like 600, you could possibly get 80 to 100 targets just in a change of offensive philosophy. DeAndre Hopkins in his career is typically inside the top 10 to 15 when it comes to double coverage. Now, last year in Tennessee, I don't have the numbers for that. The only time I could get the data for double coverage last year is coming from Matt Harmon with Reception Perception. In the 2023 season, he hasn't gotten through all of his grades yet, but he has actually got Calvin Ridley from 2023, and he was doubled on 13.6% of the time. If you take a look at 13.6% double coverage rate, that's really high. And if you think last year, a lot of teams were paying a ton of attention to a guy like Calvin Ridley. You got Calvin Ridley on one side, DeAndre Hopkins on the other, and you got an offense that's trying to throw the ball a ton. Now, while DeAndre Hopkins is not the old alpha that he once was, I think he absolutely has wide receiver 2 in the range of outcomes, and I think the efficiency should go up a lot with an offense that's throwing the ball and DeAndre Hopkins not seeing nearly the type of attention from defenses that we once did see in years past. DeAndre Hopkins still can get open, and last year showed the ability to stay healthy for 17 games. Wide receiver 58 is just criminal. He's going after Quentin Johnson, a face planter, and the Chargers are going to be a team that's going the opposite way from throwing a bunch to probably running a ton with Harbaugh in town. That's just me. Let me know what you think of DeAndre Hopkins, and let's get into the 5th player on this list. All right, so this one here is the 5th and final person on the list being wildly disrespected by y'all currently in Dynasty startups, coming off the board in the 18th round. Now, when you get to the 18th round and later in Dynasty startups, I mean, the truth is you're really shooting your shot just hoping for a prayer to hit. Most players in this range are going to be looking at one of two extremes when it comes to the profile. One of these young players in Dynasty, a rookie, a first or second year type player that really doesn't have any production under his name. Sometimes you might even be looking like a Sky Moore, a name that's really fallen out of favor, but at this point, people don't really know who else to draft. You start getting to 18, 20, 22 rounds in Dynasty. Then you have the other extreme where you're probably going to be shooting your shot on someone that's running out of time, Brandon Cooks, Tyler Boyd. You're hoping to get 1 year of crusty production, maybe a flex option if you're lucky, but you know that there's not really a whole lot of upside. You're riding out the sunset of somebody that doesn't have any type of Dynasty value. Now, but here's the thing. What if I told you in the 18th round in Dynasty startups that there's a guy in his second and third season finished inside the top 12 in points per game? And not only that, when the 2024 season starts, he's only going to be 26 years old. He still has all the athletic traits to really skyrocket up the board as far as Dynasty value. And what if I told you that I can give you the blueprint? 2 other people at the same position that I can show you were kind of forgotten about in Dynasty and then skyrocketed up the board are being drafted currently inside the top 100 picks in Dynasty startups right now. You say it's too good to be true, right? All right, and here's the thing. I'll even level with you. This is a guy that I'm really high on, have a bunch of shares of in Dynasty. The last 3 weeks in particular, I've been starting to plant my flag on this guy. But going into this video, I put my bias aside, took a look at the numbers, and really started digging into, do these numbers speak to the upside I believe is there? Or is this just me being bullish on somebody I really want to see succeed? The more I dug into the numbers, and the more I compared these 3 players in particular, there is so much more to it than I even thought initially. And now more than ever, I'm convinced that in the 18th round, this player is a screaming Dynasty value. And we're about to bring this video full circle and bring back the first person on the list, Evan Engram, and compare his career to David Njoku's, and in the 18th round, Noah Fant. So let's rewind the clock. 2017, late part of the first round, Evan Engram comes off the board, coming out of Ole Miss, followed by the 29th pick overall, the Cleveland Browns take David Njoku coming out of Miami, Florida. Now, in his first season, Evan Engram was playing an unreal amount of snaps for the Giants after they used a premium pick on him. They were basically playing him in over 80% of snaps in every game until he got hurt in week 16. Multiple games he actually recorded 100% snap share, which is unreal for a rookie. Speaking of unreal for a rookie, Jeremy Shockey leads all rookie tight ends in targets at 127. Evan Engram in his first season with the Giants had 115 targets. Now since then we've seen guys like Sam Laporta last year to have 120 targets and Kyle Pitts to have 110. But those are all outlier seasons when it comes to a rookie in the NFL at the tight end position, and Evan Engram thrived in this role, finishing as a rookie at tight end 5 in points per game. Now going into his second year, David Njoku for the Browns got his snap share a lot closer to that 80% range, but he had 4 big games of over 19 points with a 1.5 tight end premium. And although he didn't have the most complete season, through those big 4 games and the rest of his body of work, finished the year as tight end 9. Now, both of these guys drafted later in the first round. They didn't actually go to good teams. Now, the Giants were 11-5 the year they drafted Evan Engram, but he was in New York for 5 seasons because they did pick up his 5th-year contract. And during those 5 seasons, the Giants were terrible, anywhere from 4 to 6 wins during that time. Now, the Browns, they just happened to have a late first that year. They were 0-16 that season. And David Njoku, for the most part of his career, the Browns were pretty bad. and David Njoku also had his fifth-year option picked up. Now, for both of these guys, during those 5 seasons, they had 3 different coaches, so a lot of different turmoil as far as different coaches and culture changes for these guys. Now, oddly enough, for both of these guys, after they had that really good season, Evan Engram, his following 2 years were injury-plagued. In his second season, he only played 11 games, and then in his third year, he only played 8 games. David Njoku, after having a second-year breakout, in his third season, only played 4 games. So now for both of these guys, going into year 4, they had a 5th-year option, both of them picked up. But the Giants, they brought in a new coach, Joe Judge, and the Browns, they brought in Kevin Stefanski in 2020. Now, in Joe Judge's first year as the head coach for New York, no competition really in that tight end room at all, and Evan Engram still at that point was getting 83% of snaps, basically top 10 in the league at that point. Now, conversely for David Njoku, things were not so gravy. With Kevin Stefanski coming to town from Minnesota, running a lot of these 2 tight end sets, the first thing he does is go out and give Austin Hooper an ungodly amount of money. They made him the 3rd highest paid tight end, only behind George Kittle and Travis Kelce, who at that point in their career had shown a lot more than Austin Hooper did. Now, about a month after that, the Browns, in the draft, they go ahead in the 4th round and they draft Harrison Bryant out of Florida Atlantic. All signals kind of were that David Njoku was not going to have his 5th-year option picked up, except for they caught him by surprise, and they actually opted in to David Njoku's 5th-year option, which really caused him to be completely confused and super disgruntled. Now, going into this 2020 season, imagine this. David Njoku was hurt in 2019, only played the 4 games. Now, the season prior to that, 2018, when he was healthy, he played in 84% of snaps. That was top 10, number 7 at the NFL as far as snap share goes. All for when he's fully healthy in 2020. A whole new coaching regime comes in, 2 new tight ends come in, one which is heavily paid. David Njoku gets only 48% of snaps. Harrison Bryant, their rookie tight end, gets 58% of snaps. Heavily paid Austin Hooper gets 77% of snaps that year. So now David Njoku, going into his 5th year in Cleveland, is in a complete mess. And while Evan Engram didn't have that same target competition problem over in New York, he had a ton of targets, got a ton of opportunity to play, but he really didn't do anything with all that opportunity, finishing the year at tight end 17. And both of these guys were coming off of really bad seasons in 2020, going into their 2021 season, the 5th-year option. Now, this is a perfect time to segue over to Noah Fant. Now, Noah Fant was in the 2019 NFL draft. He was the 2nd tight end from Iowa drafted. TJ Hawkinson went 8th overall, and then Noah Fant went 20th overall, very similar to Njoku and Engram at 23 and 29. In Noah Fant's first year in Denver, it took him a little while to start getting regular reps, but by week 8, his snap share started to go up, and you started to see some of the flashes that Noah Fant possessed, which is absolute crazy athleticism, and he ended up having 2 games of over 100-yard receiving. So going into year 2, the Denver Broncos had really high hopes for him. Let's go back to this 2020 year where Noah Fant was coming into his 2nd-year breakout, and in this season, Noah Fant was 7th in the NFL overall in targets with 93. And 23-year-old Noah Fant finished at tight end 8 on the season, where Evan Engram disappointed, tight end 17, and David Njoku was nowhere near any relevance at the tight end position, as he finished at tight end 48. And going into his 3rd year, Noah Fant had all the expectations in the world put on his shoulders. Drew Lock was the quarterback in Denver in his 2nd year. There was a bunch of hype there, but he did not pan out. And going into his year 3, they bring in Teddy Bridgewater, also not a very good option. And Noah Fant basically had a very similar season. Didn't live up to those lofty expectations. And overall, in his 3rd year, Noah Fant finished tight end 12, and both David Njoku and Evan Engram finished back-to-back at tight end 23 and 24. Kind of wrap your head around that. Right now, Noah Fant's going in the 18th round in startups, and David Njoku and Engram are going in the 9th and 7th round, respectively. And both are coming off of top 5 seasons at the tight end position. Going into year 4, there's a giant shakeup, and the Denver Broncos make a huge move to go get Russell Wilson, and the Seattle Seahawks actually acquire Noah Fant. As a part of the package and compensation, Seattle's not paying Noah Fant very much after this trade on his rookie deal still, and they had at the time Colby Parkinson and Will Dissly, and Pete Carroll is running this 3-way committee at the tight end position. 2022, everything is about to flip on its head. Both David Njoku and Evan Engram are going off of their 5th-year option and have a chance to go in as unrestricted free agents to get a chance to go dictate where they can play, as well as get a sizable chunk of change, being these type of freak athletes on the market. Now, they end up getting very similar money as far as what the contract laid out on a per-year basis. So Evan Engram leaves New York and goes to Jacksonville. He signs a 3-year, $41.25 million contract. He gets $24 million of that guaranteed for an average year contract of $13,750,000. Now, David Njoku gets an extra year, so he gets a 4-year, $54,750,000 contract. $28 million of that is guaranteed. That is $13,675,000 per year. So annually, they're getting very similar. Now, after securing this bag, the shenanigans that they're dealing with, that totally goes away. David Njoku in this 2022 season, he takes a huge step forward. snap share, 83.5%. He finishes the year tight end 10, but on a per game basis, he's tight end 8 on the season. And Evan Engram going to Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, and Doug Peterson running the show. He finishes the year at tight end 5, 12.6 points per game, where David Njoku had 12.2. Now, things were not as kind to Noah Fant. Noah Fant goes up to Seattle, and he's going to end up kind of getting something similar to the David Njoku treatment. He's going to get put in this three-way committee as far as the tight end room goes, and he goes from this 85% snap share down to 60 in his year 4. And then after having his fifth-year option picked up, Noah Fant even has his snap share come down further to 54%. And last year, he completely underwhelmed, tight end 36 on the year. And at this point, where we're going into the 2024 season, people are so out on Noah Fant and completely forget that this is a young, promising tight end that has a ton of the athletic traits. If you take a look back at the Evan Engram and David Njoku corollary. Now, David Njoku, when he signed this 4-year contract, he didn't leave Cleveland. And because people didn't associate David Njoku going to a new place, people were really sleeping on him. Whereas Evan Engram going to Jacksonville, Doug Peterson there, as well as Trevor Lawrence, and his cost started to really come up. Now, Noah Fant going into this 2024 free agency was in the exact same position that both Evan Engram and David Njoku were going into the 2022 season. Unrestricted free agent, and could really see what they could command on the market. So Noah Fant stays with Seattle. He gets a 2-year deal worth $21 million. Colby Parkinson gets a 3-year deal for $22.5 million to stay in division to go to the Los Angeles Rams. And Will Dissly, he gets a 3-year, $14 million deal to go to the LA Chargers. So on the surface, Noah Fant doesn't get the Evan Engram bump. If you take a look at the David Njoku corollary, there, David Njoku stayed with the exact same situation. Kevin Stefanski was there. The guy that had held him back actually was still the coach when they brought him in for another 4-year contract. Here in Seattle, not only is the target competition gone, so Austin Hooper did leave for David Njoku, but Harrison Bryant was still in town. All the tight ends prior for the Seattle team are gone. The new head coach for the Seahawks is a defensive-minded guy, Mike McDaniel, but they bring in a new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, and Ryan Grubb was the OC at Washington for the Washington Huskies, and he led them last year while they led the country as far as a passing attack went. And he brings a very pass-happy nature to the Seattle offense, where Noah Fant is really the only tight end to speak of. Let's take a look at the tight end salaries, currently the top paid tight ends in the league. So when you take a look at the tight end contracts on an annual basis, number 1, you got Darren Waller at $17 million. He got 43% of that contract guaranteed at signing. Then you have 2, TJ Hawkinson, he's at $16.5 million. 3, George Kittle at $15 million a year. George Kittle, $14 million. Mark Andrews, $14 million. Evan Engram at number 6, got $13.75 million. David Njoku, $13.67 million. Cole Kmet recently, $12.5 million. And Dalton Schultz this offseason decided to stay in Houston, of course, with CJ Stroud, $12.5 million. And Noah Fant. And then you got Noah Fant, who is the 10th highest paid tight end, where he's scheduled to make an average of 10.5 over the next 2 years, 54% guaranteed. 2 things to really consider. 1, the Seattle Seahawks had options to keep Parkinson and Dissly at cheaper options, but this coaching staff decided to pay up for Noah Fant and make him a top 10 paid tight end in the NFL. So not just that he's paid very highly, but think about it on the surface level. When a tight end is on their rookie contract, that contract realistically, relative to the team, isn't going to be that big of a deal, and you're not going to necessarily shy away from paying a tight end or bringing in some other bodies to go around this rookie tight end. But when you go out and pay a tight end, what you pay Njoku, what you pay Engram, and what you pay now Noah Fant, making them top 10 options as far as the salary goes, you're not going to go pay 2 tight ends very heavily. And when you do that, you're probably not going to have very much target competition around these guys. And that's what you're going to see here with Noah Fant. Now, one last crazy one. David Njoku and Noah Fant, both really athletic tight ends, came into the league with a lot to be desired as blockers. After David Njoku signs this big extension for 4 years, they move on from Austin Hooper. They still have Harrison Bryant around, but what do? They bring in Pharaoh Brown to complement the tight end room. Pharaoh Brown is a great blocking tight end, but doesn't really offer much at all as far as the receiving department goes. So you're going to bring him in for the blocking situations, which isn't going to really get in the way of David Njoku running routes or his snap percentage. Pharaoh Brown played 13 games. He had a total of 5 catches. Now, after they signed Noah Fant to this contract just now, obviously Dissly and Parkinson are gone, so you have to fill out the tight end room somehow, right? What are you going to do? Bring in the big blocking tight end in Pharaoh Brown to complement Noah Fant. Let's go. He's going to be blocking. Noah Fant's going to be running, and we're finally going to get to see the gazelle that Noah Fant is going over to Ryan Grubb in an offense that's going to pass the ball a lot more. Noah Fant is going to be freed. If it's not now, it's probably never for Noah Fant. And even though the Seahawks still have JSN, they brought back Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf is there. With this team taking a big step forward as far as the passing volume, because all those other passing weapons are there. Noah Fant, when he sees single coverage from backers, if you get him into space and one tackle is missed, he can take a huge, massive run to the house, and we're going to see Noah Fant and all this athleticism finally unleashed. So that's it. That's the list. Those are the 5 guys I think you're being wildly disrespectful to when it comes to Dynasty startups and their current value in Dynasty. Do you like some of the guys on the list? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you back here, same time, same place, talking more Dynasty strategy and trades on Friday for the BDGE Dynasty channel. I'm out of this thing. Peace.